Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 129 of the podcast for August 31st, 2011. My guest today is Chris Cooper. He is a vice president with the consulting firm Simpler, and he is the author of a new book called The Little Book of Lean. So if you want to learn more about this book, you can go to simpler.com/publications.html. And for other episodes of the podcast or for information about how to subscribe to get every episode automatically, you can go to leanpodcast.org. Thanks for listening. Well, joining us today from Manchester, England, I want to welcome Chris Cooper to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So if you could start off, tell the listeners about your background and how you first got involved with Lean in your career.
Yeah, I first got involved in Lean, I would say, it's over 20 years ago now. I was, as a young engineer, very curious about Japanese, particularly Japanese motorcycle manufacturing. I was first and foremost a motorcycle enthusiast, and I remember as a young teenager and an aspiring engineer seeing what the guys were doing at Honda and Kawasaki and Suzuki and Yamaha, and actually seeing what they were doing to my own UK-based motorcycle industry without any knowledge of how they were doing it at all, and just sort of standing and watching in awe. And then, really by a quirk of fate, I was training to be an engineer, studying to be an engineer, and working at an aerospace company, which is now known worldwide as BAE Systems. Mm-hmm. And in 1989, we had a strategic tie-up with Kawasaki, and that was set up by the UK government on the basis of trade sharing, because the UK government had seen that in terms of productivity and competitiveness, the UK industry was having some issues, and they'd rightly identified that, the Japanese could help us. Mm-hmm. And you can probably imagine how that story went. The higher levels of our organisation remained largely uninterested. Mm. And as an aspiring junior manager, I was exposed to this thing called the Kawasaki Production System, which was actually, even in its documentation, was a complete copy of the Toyota production system. And really that's where my journey started. I saw, the kind of revelation things that most people see when they come from the traditional world to the lean world, and I was completely sort of sold. So I apprenticed myself to that system for as long as those guys were around, and that was really what started my journey.
And then in the introduction to your book, A Little Book of Lean, you talk about some of the other influences, George Koenigsaecker, Jim Womack, Danaher as a company. Can you talk about some of those influences and the impact and what you learned from them?
Yeah, the timeline was really, the timeline was kind of in those early days. We used to, we used to talk about just in time, and we used to talk about the continuous flow manufacturing. I realized that you'd begin to bump into the same people being taught by the same sort of guys. So in the introduction to my book, I call, this the Toyota School of Improvement, which I'm sure they would call it the Deming School of Improvement as well. But, it became clear to me that the people that were doing really good things were being taught by, a similar bunch of people. So I met Jim Womack and Dan Jones very early on. They visited one of our sites. I was involved in more of our sites with Lean at this, and I know at one time we were under consideration for discussions about some write-ups in their books. And through that I met for example, George Koenigsegger, and what he was doing at Hon, and then what he was doing at Lean Investments, and I sort of struck up a relationship with George and started to learn more from George, and then laterally I also studied Danaher and apprenticed myself to a couple of Danaher VPs, and really tried to understand what is it about their system that makes their system as repeatable as Toyota's in a way, because I think that's one of the great untold stories of Lean is that Danaher's system, keeps being repeated over and over again.
Yeah, and I think Danaher's somewhat private and secretive in a way. A lot of people haven't been exposed to Danaher. I mean, is there a difference? Just a quick question: the Danaher approach, the Toyota approach.
Yeah, I think the Danaher approach is a much more, from what I've studied, it's a much more aggressive on the business front, but it's, I would guess, as equally committed in terms of the culture, whereas the Toyota approach is driven from a very sort of Japanese approach. I think ultimately Danaher's story comes down to the fact that the guys that own it are not manufacturing guys, so they don't have the traditional manufacturing paradigm of what is and what isn't possible. Plus, they're habitual users of policy deployment, which is a huge cipher stone for a lean transformation that a lot of people miss out.
Yeah. So let's shift and talk about the book, the Little Book of Lean. Tell us the background, why you wrote the book, and what the intended audience and impact will be from the book that you think.
Yeah, the motivation for writing the book was something that had been bubbling up over a number of years, and when I actually put pen to paper, I couldn't believe really how long it had taken me to write it. I had a late night conversation, as I do sometimes across the water with Steve Spear. I was talking to Stephen, and we were talking about a company that we'd been in touch with, and I'd met Stephen some years ago, and there's kind of I find there's two sort of secret codes in Lean. I mean, one is that when you recognize that somebody knows the same stuff as you, there's a kind of connection. But then there's a deeper connection with the people that really get the behavioral side of Lean. And that was something that Steve and I, we found ourselves in a room helping a business, and, we both recognized that I think we were coming from that same level of understanding. And, anyway, the long story in a short version is that I was saying to Steve that, I was frustrated that, new generations of managers weren't entering the workplace with this knowledge, and that effectively, what seemed to be happening was people were being taught economy of scale thinking and paradigms over and over again. And I said to Stephen in the call, I said, we really need a sort of Lean 101, book that helps those people. And Stephen just said, well, why don't you write it? And I sort of said, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. I think the other thing which we didn't discuss, but was really bothering me over the years, was that I thought that the intellectual cost of entry, if you like, to get into the lean thinking world was not really serving the people who needed it. In fact, the intellectual costs seemed to be going higher and higher and higher as people had to understand more and more tools, and had to understand associated concepts such as when people brought lean, Michael Dodge, for example, brought lean and Six Sigma together. I thought that was a bit troubling, because it kind of made what should be a very simple subject start to sound very complicated. And just as an aside to that, I was recently a guest at Nissan Manufacturing UK last month, and they haven't had theirs. They've had 20 years of productivity improvement, and they haven't done that by having one or two people understand what they're trying to do. They've had it by having 4,000 people understand what they do, and 4,000 people able to, and that's just in the UK,
Sure.
able to help them improve. So yeah, I had even as somebody who considers themselves a lean sensei, I had a bit of a problem with that sort of cultural elite model that says, there's only going to be 4 or 5 people that are really going to understand this thing, and all the rest of you have to be guided by them.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, no, I was just saying, and then finally there was a real practical reason for the book, which was whenever, I'm called as a sensei to go and to meet with people, one of the first questions I always was asked was, what book should we read? And, with the deepest respect that I have for Jim Womack and Dan Jones, I used to say to people, read Lean Thinking. And the problem was it always used to create far too many questions than it did answers for people. So if I gave Lean Thinking, for example, to an orthopedic surgeon, they would say, what the hell has this got to do with me, because I don't make anything.
Yeah.
And, if I gave, I had principals from schools asking me, what is it that you do as a job? And, you try and point them to lean thinking, and they'd say, I still don't understand, what it means to me. So those were really the 3 things that were motivating the creation of the book.
And in the book, very early on, you state, there's a lot more to this than a bunch of tools. So, can you elaborate on some of your views of, the importance of combining, principles and tools with culture and different ways of managing?
Yeah, I think for me, the tools, if you go all the way through the history of evolution, and, in order to do that, you have to study Toyota a lot. I probably, did that to a level of distraction that was probably unhealthy. But, everything that I understood about the evolution and having then practically attempted it myself is the tools are only ever a response to a philosophical question. Whenever you need to remove waste from an activity, or you want to improve the flow or something like that, that's when the tools become important. But everything starts with the principles and the essence of what you're trying to do. And if you're trying to solve problems in that certain way of looking at things, that lean drives you to, then the tools should always take a secondary position. And, sometimes 2 or 3 different tools could be used, for the exact same problem and get slightly different answers. But, the main thing is the overall sort of philosophy and principles that you're trying to achieve. And that's why, for me, the book had to be small. It had to be deliberately distilled down to the very essence of what we're trying to do, rather than expand itself to show how much I know about lean, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, and it reminds me of the old, I think it was a Mark Twain joke of, writing a long letter, and he says something like, I apologize, the letter would have been shorter, but I didn't have the time.
Yeah, that's a great quote. That, I think it goes along the lines of, sorry, I didn't have time to write a short letter.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was one of the challenges really in writing the book was, because I was really in a distillation, I was trying to distill to its essence, right, and do that without losing any of the essence. It was actually a really good discipline for writing the book, because it made it really, really hard about what is the absolute essence that you have to put in this thing.
Yeah.
And what also what does the reader have to build for themselves to get there by reading it. So the unusual structure of the book with the kind of theory, if you like, and then the sensei questions
right.
was deliberate. It was deliberate. I could have written lots of case studies of, all of the places that I've been to help people do this stuff. But actually, it only gains meaning when people start to think about how it applies to them.
Yeah, I liked how the questions prompt people to think through those ideas in their own context.
Yeah, because primarily that it starts with the thinking process. I mean, when E.G. Toyota said to his workers, straight after the war, I want you to think about, just-in-time production. I mean, he only clearly had a vague idea of what he wanted the organization to achieve, but he had a very clear idea of the thinking that he wanted them to adopt.
Yeah.
And it was that it's that thinking that gets to the solutions. I think that's the irony of it. I was in Nissan just a month ago, and I've been fortunate enough to be a guest at Toyota plants as well. Their current state, if you like, of where they are, is the result of 60 years of thinking and problem solving in the same way. And if you take thousands of people and have them thinking and problem solving in the same way, then you get to solutions that look like a Toyota or a Nissan or a Honda plant, for example, does today. But, I always stress to my students, if you like, and my clients that, that's not how your business has to look tomorrow. You have to think through, first of all, the questions in your own mind and then start to move in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
I was, it's legendary now, but I was given the same advice by our Japanese teachers when Kawasaki first came into my life that, hey, we're 60 years ahead of you guys and you'll never catch us up. And I never really knew what that meant.
Yeah.
It took me a while to realize that, they were actually 60 years ahead. And what it means is that what I've learned the hard way is it's very difficult for people to accelerate their own learning. There's no way people can go from, being where they are to being a Toyota overnight.
Well, I think, people, leaders are often impatient. So if you say this is going to take 60 years, a lot of people want something that's just a 6-month initiative that they can say they're done with, as opposed to really changing and shifting to that new way of thinking and operating and improving over time. So, I mean, what's your response when you find somebody who maybe has that impatience and says, "Chris, we got to get there next year"?
Yeah, well, I think the lean, I'd say the lean industry and the lean community has a bit of, self-reflection to do on that, because, I also think that those same leaders have a right to results from day one. Mm-hmm. And I think the problem is that a lot of the stuff which is going on under the banner of lean is not properly results focused. I mean, if you go into, if you were to picture yourself, with E.G. Toyota in the immediate post-war, you would have found yourself in a sort of burning platform. Yeah. In a real sort of do or die situation. It was like we have to match American levels of productivity before those guys arrive in our country, otherwise we're dead. And so, even though their first fledgling steps along the way would have been, fraught with problems and trying and retrying things, I mean, they still had to demand results. And I think, the problem with a lot of lean guys is that they miss the need for results. And the need for results always outstrips, the short-term perfectionism in terms of the philosophy. So, I actually say at the moment, I didn't write it in my book, but I do speak to people and say there's two problems because, you know, there are two schools of Lean. There's the Toyota school and there's the Toyota school. And what I mean by that, you know, cryptic comment is that there's the Toyota post-war school, which is very senior management driven, results driven. And then there's Toyota Today model, which is very much focused around, you know, long-term improvements in terms of quality, and you know, that quality focus has been there forever. But you know, there was also a burning business platform focus, which has been missing for them anyway, for quite a while. I know that, you know, I've watched the comments of Toyota leaders over the last 2 decades, and I know that they've always stressed the importance of, you know, giving people this idea that, you know, you should never rest on your laurels. But in terms of the big changes, you know, for them, that's gone from re-engineering plants from mass production to flow to, you know, let's build another plant. And I think, you know, that's two different mindsets.
Sure. Well, Chris, it's been really good talking to you here and getting, you know, kind of introduction to yourself and to your book, The Little Book of Lean. For the listeners, if they want to find your book, it looks like at the moment it's not available on Amazon. Where can they find the book? Where can they learn more about it?
Yeah, the book is available through the simpler.com website, www.simpler.com. And we're just about to pursue that, about being able to get that as a print-on-demand book through Amazon. So I'm excited about, you know, people being able to pick that up and, you know, either go straight to the website initially, and then it will expand beyond that. And I think, you know, my aim especially for, you know, for anybody interested in the field was, you know, my aim was for it to be a book that gets passed around. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, when people pass it to somebody else and, or pass them a copy and then sort of sit down with them and understand their responses to the questions, that they would have a better handle on where people were starting from and how much, you know, they're, as an organisation, what sort of change they had on their hands, you know. So I think I thought to myself that if every client I had a copy of that book and they'd filled all the questions in, and then we sat down and had a chat from that point, we'd probably save ourselves a lot of pain and
sure.
and have a lot more fun.
Well, Chris Cooper, thanks again for taking time to chat today here on the podcast. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a real pleasure, and look forward to speaking again.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.